Unfortunately, I am afraid, as always, of going on. For to go on means going from here, means finding me, losing me, vanishing and beginning again. A stranger first, then little by little the same as always, in another place, where I shall say I have always been, of which I shall know nothing, being incapable of seeing, moving, thinking, speaking, but of which little by little, in spite of these handicaps, I shall begin to know something, just enough for it to turn out to be the same place as always, the same which seems made for me and does not want me, which I seem to want and do not want. Take your choice, which spews me out or swallows me up, I'll never know. Which is perhaps merely the inside of my distant skull where I once wandered. Now I'm fixed, lost for tininess, or straining against the walls with my head, my hands, my feet, my back, and ever murmuring my old stories, my old story as if it were the first time. So there is nothing to be afraid of, and yet I am afraid. Afraid of what my words will do to me, to my refuge yet again. Is there really nothing new to try? Hi everyone, this is Aisha and welcome to Read a Day Club. In today's video, I will be talking about these many books, and I will also be doing a book haul at the end of the video. So if you want to move back and forth, because I will be talking about quite a few books in this video, I have added the timestamps so you can pick for yourself which book you'd like to hear me talk about first. So anyway, I'll quickly start with the first book, which is Hamlet by Shakespeare. Before I talk about Hamlet, I want to get to Hamlet through Harold Bloom. Bloom's interpretation of Hamlet in his Hamlet poem Unlimited. Now, I don't have this book with me right now. I read a few passages of it online, and in it, Harold Bloom summarizes Hamlet as just not belonging to any particular genre. And out of all of Shakespeare's works, Hamlet has been described by Bloom as the most unlimited, that it is a meditation upon human fragility in confrontation with death. This book, Hamlet Poem Unlimited, is just a collection of essays exploring the literary impact of Shakespeare's Hamlet, as well as Bloom's inquiry into the depth of Hamlet. And now I've not read the entire book, but the one that I do have and that I have read a significant chunk of is Bloom's Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human. And this book is indispensable, to be honest, because I never read Shakespeare in school or college. So for someone like me who's new to the world of Shakespeare's tragedies, Bloom's essays were very insightful in tracing the essence of Shakespeare's writing, its context, its historical background, and even how Shakespeare has influenced Shakespeare's tragedies. His drama has influenced so many other literary works. Now, I mean, in just this one essay on Hamlet in this book, you get so many other great recommendations that complement your reading of Shakespeare. Now, before starting this essay on Hamlet, I made a small note of all the recommendations that Bloom bestows, for somebody who is looking to dive deeper into just the world of Shakespeare, but also how his work relates to other literary works. So you read about Goethe's Faust, James Joyce's Ulysses, Dante's Divine Comedy, Proust's In Search of Lost Time, and a few others. And these are not necessarily synonymous with Hamlet thematically, or even in their key themes and ideas, but just the overall atmosphere surrounding Hamlet is just, and how it sort of relates to these other literary works, is worth reading about. In my other readings, there were a lot of parallels that were drawn between Shakespeare's Hamlet and Samuel Beckett's writing, especially the way that Beckett writes is it's very melancholic, it's very nihilistic, it's very bleak. And when I was reading Hamlet, I did find those similarities. Like I was aware that Hamlet's writing is quite modern, it's quite psychological, it's quite crippling, and it's something that I realized as I was reading Hamlet was that it felt quite ahead of its time. I mean, Hamlet is not a very grandiose play. Even structurally, it doesn't feel like a very grandiose play. It feels quite modern. It feels quite incisively psychological. It evoked so much of that existential angst and that piercing self-awareness. The whole reading of Hamlet feels very down to earth. It feels very realistic. It feels very relatable, for the lack of a better word. And I think for someone like me who hasn't read Shakespeare, a lot of Shakespeare, I mean, the other work of Shakespeare that I have read is The Tempest, and since it was my first time reading Shakespeare, I don't think it was the best place to start from. And after reading Hamlet, I realized that, now reading Shakespeare's other works through the lens of Hamlet is more rewarding than just reading The Tempest. Hamlet is a better gateway than The Tempest through, in order to navigate the tragedies of Shakespeare. There's this interplay between reality and dreams, darkness and light, past and present, life and death. So, the power of opposites is something that is very acutely felt. And you feel like you're not reading something that feels outdated. You're not reading something that feels okay, forget it. Doesn't feel. We don't know what it feels. Yeah, so anyway, I do recommend Hamlet. I do recommend this play for people who have not read Shakespeare and want to get into the world of Shakespeare. Just the way that Shakespeare alternates between opposites, between the contradictory nature of human, and just all those parables, how he talks about despair and happiness, he talks about dreams and reality. Okay, moving on. The book that I read right before Hamlet was Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. Now, this is a play. To be honest, I wasn't aware of the similarities between Hamlet and Samuel Beckett's writing as I was reading it. I read about it after I read Hamlet. It just felt like serendipity, to be honest, to read both books one after the other without being aware of the common elements, and it just sort of rekindles your faith in literature, when something like this happens. And anyway, Waiting for Godot is such a satisfying read. It is so visceral, it is so philosophical, and it is so ironically freeing. It goes against the grain, of the etiquette of living, just how we read life and stories and how we expect to overcome barriers and meet happier endings, that sort of erase the sting of existing. And if you've read novels or plays that are a bit overwhelmingly optimistic, then reading Waiting for Godot is definitely going to be a shocker. Not that optimistic books are bad, but I personally enjoy and love reading books that sort of leave things out to rot, like where everything is just bare and unapologetic most of all. And that's exactly how the setting of Waiting for Godot is placed. It's unapologetic at its best, and it's stubbornly repetitive and verbose at its worst. And this plays a major role in carrying the essence, or the core of the onion, if you will, forward as you're reading Beckett. Repetition is characterized as absurd. The characters keep repeating themselves in order to justify or validate their existence. As a reader, you are forced to engage with this passage of time that is, to be honest, leading up to nowhere. And I imagine this can frustrate a lot of readers, to read something that has nothing to say, but for me it just felt like a breath of fresh air. Another reason why I enjoyed reading Waiting for Godot so much is because it's free of any kind of false ornamentation, to be honest. Like, the whole facade of artificiality, of pretension is completely ripped off. So Waiting for Godot can be very philosophical for that very reason. I mean, Beckett's writing focuses on inaction, loss of time, bareness of feeling and movement at its most visceral state, focusing on one's awareness of self in a very cathartic manner that is also very tragic at the same time. So I definitely recommend Waiting for Godot, even more so because it just sort of complements Hamlet in so many ways, in so many surprising ways. Now this next book is a horror manga, that is Junji Ito's Uzumaki. The story essentially translates into an obsession with spirals. Now I don't want to spoil the story of Uzumaki for you because I highly recommend that you read it without any prior knowledge. But Uzumaki has labyrinths, it has psychological realism, dreams, the concept of the collective consciousness. It even has very acute mythological concepts of life and death, reconstruction, darkness and light, and so on. So if you like navigating psychological waters, especially when it comes to manga, I highly recommend this. Now, the next book that I read is Samuel Beckett's Molloy, Malone Dies, and The Unnamable. Beckett's writing is unapologetic. I mean, he really pulls you in with his descriptions of decay, human suffering, disease. Now, his writing is difficult to gauge at first, but there is a creative arc, there is a creative structure to his writing. Now, when I was reading Molloy and Malone Dies, I did not gauge this structure, but it was when I was reading The Unnamable, which is the third novel in his trilogy, a lot of things sort of came together and started making sense, and that's when you realize that it goes deeper than just talking about confusion and despair and disquiet and just angst. It's more to do with really serious and intense topics such as mental illness, aging, and there is that growing unease in relation to the dichotomy between mind and body. So the mind stands for everything that is abstract, feelings, emotions, awareness, and passing of time, and then on the other side that you have is aging and disease and death as his as the main themes of this trilogy. And it's very contradictory. Molloy's descriptions of physical self within and through the lens of aging and disease and hunger and pain feels very cathartic, it feels very psychological. And as I was reading this trilogy, there were lots of things that I was tracking in the margins, but I eventually gave up because I would have ended up tabbing every single line and every single page. But a lot of things that were consistent across these three novels was the themes of religion, mental illness, although mental illness is something that is weaved into the narrative of Molloy and Malone Dies, so there's no explicit mention of mental illness, it's mostly implicit, but you really feel this acutely when you read the last novel, which is The Unnamable. There's also the mention of God, that the protagonist uses to sort of vindicate humanity and even condone human existence and its pathological nature. Now before I end this video, I want to very quickly do a book haul and show you a few books that I got. Now these books are second-hand copies. I got them from this used book market at Flora Fountain at Churchgate, so just 5 minutes walking distance from Churchgate station in Bombay. First book is The First Philosophers. Now this is a book that I'm very interested in reading. I'll probably do sort of a reading vlog of it, because I think I do a better job of explaining what's in the book after reading it, because I have no clue. All I know is that it's about the first philosophers. I mean, at the back it's written, these first philosophers paved the way for the work of Plato and Aristotle, and hence for the whole of Western thought. So this is something that I have never read. Usually my education in philosophy started from Plato and Aristotle. I never read the first philosophers, the sophists, so I'm very excited to read this. I think I will very soon. The next read is now anything that I find by Murdoch, I will read. I will pick up right away, and that's exactly what I did. As soon as I saw a severed head, I just knew I had to get it. And I have read hers The Sea, and I've even read her non-fiction, that is Existentialists and Mistakes. I've loved both those books. I mean, her writing is something I have never read before. It's so incisive, it is so powerful, it's so moving. So yes, I'm very excited for this one as well. The next one is James Joyce's Ulysses. Now I already had another copy of this book. I didn't like the cover so much, so I decided to, exchange it for something that looks and feels like it's a James Joyce book. I like the faded texture and just the color of this book as well, so this is the next one. Then we have next we have is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Now I have read this, but I had it on my Kindle. My Kindle doesn't work anymore, but yeah, I mean, I remember reading it and just wondering why I didn't get the paperback, because there was so much that I wanted to annotate, there's so much I wanted to tab and just sort of write in the margins. So I'm really going to enjoy annotating and rereading this one. I also found another very beautiful copy of Oscar Wilde's plays. So these are the two Oscar Wilde books. Next is Shakespeare's Othello. I have Age of Iron. Now I have read Disgrace by this author, and it was such a powerful and cathartic read, to be honest. You just don't forget the writing. You just don't forget it. Like, I think it's been almost a year and a half since I've read Disgrace, and I still remember it so vividly. It's as if I just read it last week. Then the next one is Brideshead Revisited, Henry James's The Ambassadors. Then we have Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale. Then there is Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, and this is Don Juan by Lord Byron. Now this is an interesting one. Byron was a romantic poet, and if you don't already know about his work, this one is a poem that's very self-aware of its poetic language. I remember reading somewhere that it is a poem written about itself. So it's about the gloominess of human life, the portrait of which is sketched in a very romantic and confessional and witty manner. And two other books that I got a few days later was Moravia's Boredom. The last one that arrived just today is a classic, that is Victor Hugo. Yes, these were all the books that I had to show you, and really hope that you like this video. And if you have any other recommendations based off of all the ones that I've spoke about, please let me know in the comment section below. And yeah, so this is Aisha from Read a Day Club, and I'll see you guys next time.